Welcome to Reaching Minds, Thoughts for Your Life's Journey. In today's podcast, we're going to be exploring the human edge in the age of AI. What value does it bring to our equation? What are some of the ways do we interact with technology? And what is the edge do we bring into our own lives in this age and domination of AI? And I'm glad to say that I'm joined by Dr. Kavin Mistry, who is a neuro-radiologist, an individual who is focused and who's passionate about what are the subtle changes that drive things in our brain. And he's done enormous amount of studies around the brain and the aging process. Why is it that some people who are 80 years old have a mind of a 40-year-old, and yet there are some people who are 40s who are maybe have a mindset of an 80-year-old. We're going to be exploring what is the trade-off for us using the technology of AI, and what is our relationship, and how do we harness AI in a way that doesn't leave us with very little to do, that makes us what I would consider lazy, and we outsource it. So I'm really, really looking forward to my conversation with Kavin today. Welcome.
Glad to be here, Nita.
So tell me, how did you come into this space of as a neuro-radiologist and exploring the brain?
Nita, I've always been a visual person. And, people say, how do you pick a career? And you try to go with what you're passionate about. And for me to be able to not just diagnose people from their symptoms, my hat's off to all the doctors out there who do that. But as a radiologist, not just look at symptoms, but to actually look at people's brains and spines and come up with a diagnosis, I think it's so fascinating, and the whole field fascinated me. And so I said I couldn't think of any other career, and then that's what brought me to radiology. And the insights that I've uncovered over the past 20 years have been mind-blowing in a sense.
As our topic is about the edge in the age of AI, tell me a little bit about that and what's got you, into researching that more.
As you mentioned a little bit in the introduction, when I was a young radiologist, I came into radiology reading all the normal anatomy books. And then I started reading these scans on these patients. And what shocked me was the sheer number of 40-year-olds and 30-year-olds that had brains and bodies that looked like they were 50 and 60. And I said, that's very interesting. And my first question was, why is nobody talking about this? We report these studies out as no acute disease, but why is nobody talking about this? And then, interestingly, I would see, rarely, but I would see 70, 80-year-olds who had brains that looked like they were 40. So it started this questioning that what is really driving this aging process? Because if our chronological age, which is the age on the paper, is not matching our biological age or the physical parameters that I'm seeing, then what is really driving this aging process? And so over the past 20 years, I have, after going through probably close to 300,000 scans, I've picked up patterns and tried to put them in actionable buckets for people.
So how does that relate to our subject area around AI? Can you sort of unpack that for us?
So beyond this idea of what is driving aging. And it's all related, but what has come to light, Nita, in the past 10 years, I would say, and especially as AI has taken root across many industries, and I would say 70% of AI is implemented in radiology because of the image detection aspects. At any given time at my institution, we're testing about close to about 30 products from different AI companies, different AI vendors, trying to pick up different things in radiology on imaging. But not only that, there's a lot of automizing of workflows and where we are using AI as well. So it's not all imaging related. And what is interesting is from the imaging aspect, the AI implementation has allowed us to see very, very subtle changes in the brain that we could never see with our naked human eye. And over the past 10 years, we've seen multiple patients in their 40s and 50s coming in for issues related to brain fog, memory issues, where when we did the scan, the regular MRI is normal. But when we do these AI powered, what we call is like these volumetric imaging, where we see subtle changes, we are seeing that in these patients, in some of them at least, their brains are shrinking faster. They're losing more brain volume than expected. And essentially, I'm seeing people, quote unquote, lose their mind in front of me on my scan. And so my mission has been really to educate people. Technology and all this automation and AI is changing our brain. And what my passion is in teaching people is that how we can prevent that and what we can do to mitigate that impact.
Right. And I know that when we spoke earlier on, how does your human framework that we spoke about, how does that fit into what you're describing, the 5 elements?
What is keeping our brain alive and vital? That becomes the question. And as we start, as I used the term before when we spoke, outsourcing our mental faculties to AI. I mean, we always talk about outsourcing to other countries, but now we're outsourcing to AI, right? So simple things like instead of now writing an email, you have maybe ChatGPT or Claude write an email. Well, it's very efficient, and I'm sure the AI platform will do a much better job in terms of spelling mistakes and everything like that. But what did you trade? What was the trade-off in doing that move? And that is a question nobody's asking and that we need to ask. And in that trade-off, what I've seen is that when you outsource that mental faculty, that part of your brain that is involved in curating and in creating that email, it is used less. And over time, when we start outsourcing all these faculties, we are then losing a lot of our brain capacity. And in neuroscience, we have this rule that it's either you use it or you lose it. Okay. And there is what is known as this principle of tuning and pruning. And tuning and pruning means that your brain will start optimizing to whatever activity you're doing the most and will start pruning all the areas in your brain that you're underutilizing. And so think about all the mental faculties we are underutilizing as we engage with technology. And if there's pruning happening, then you have less brain at the end of the day.
But surely, if we're, here's my provocative thought, is if we're outsourcing, aren't we replacing it with maybe more time focusing on other things?
And that's a great question. And I love it when people ask that. And Nita, and you're absolutely right. And here's a very good example of that is I would say 5 years ago, when a doctor would come into an office, he would be very pressured to take a lot of detailed notes because at least in the US, and I'm not sure exactly in the UK what the charting rules are, but in the US, to bill for a certain amount, they have to chart to a certain level of detail. So what we would see is that here's a doctor who comes and wants to talk to you, take your history of symptoms and everything like that. But then in between you and the doctor, there's this big laptop where he's typing away and he's typing everything that you're saying and everything like that because he needs to submit that for reimbursement. Now, a doctor can walk in and he can have the AI agent in the back listening, and it is charting everything. So now the doctor can sit and have a real human conversation. So if technology is used in that sense, where we've now used AI to have a better human to human conversation, then we've done a good job. We have actually, from my perspective, you've used technology to become more human, and that's a win. But in majority of the cases, this is not the type of scenario that is playing out. What I see is people are using technology, getting that time back, but then using that same time to actually engage with more technology, right? They will use that extra time to surf on the internet, to check their social media feeds, or do all these mindless tasks because now they have that extra time. And now, so you've got the efficiency from AI implementation, but you're going from digital efficiency to doing more digital. And my argument is, unless you replace that digital time with something analog that builds you, such as human connection, then you're going to lose. If you don't make it has to be a fair trade. It has to be a trade where you're becoming more in the process.
Can you, your acronyms of your 5 elements, can you unpack them for us? And how does that connect with what you're just saying?
So as a overview, the question becomes, what is our human edge in this age of AI? And there are many elements that came into play. And over the years, I found that there were 5 that were so critical to maintaining who we are as humanity, which if ignored, we're going to lose a substantial, not only our brains are going to shrink, that's for sure, but we're going to lose substantial parts of who we are as humans at a fundamental level. Acronym I use is HUMAN, HUMAN. And H stands for our ability to be here. U is our ability to be undistracted. M is our ability to be meaningfully driven. And A is our ability to be aligned with others. And N is our ability to be never forgotten. And each of those elements has a very strong neuroscience basis to why these faculties are very, very important to our brain health and our survival overall.
Before we continue, I'd love to invite you to visit my website, where you'll find more resources to support your personal and professional journey. Whether you're exploring leadership development, coaching, supervision, or inclusive workplaces, you can go and visit there for deeper reflections to help you to grow. You'll find everything at neetasharma.com. It's also the best place to connect with me directly and discover what's coming up. And of course, there are all the back catalogue episodes of podcasts that you can tap into and gain lots of wisdoms and reflections. So those are very powerful. I love the last one, never to be forgotten. So how do we ensure that as human beings that we're in the here, we're sort of mentally present, we're aligned with connection with others? And so how do we start implementing these things so that AI doesn't take over, but actually it sits beside us?
So, Nita, I am in the process of developing a whole corporate program with these 5 paradigms and with this human framework. And the goal here is that as companies implement AI, they need to empower, as we empower technology, we need to empower the humanity using that technology even more.
How do we do that? How do we empower the human people who are using it?
So, as you mentioned, you said that when we use technology, we have this extra capacity because of the efficiency, right? And like, let's say we were working in corporate, and now we have become more efficient. Now we have 20% time to engage with, and do whatever you want. Well, this is where I say that this is where we need to focus on these 5 elements. And it depends on where it applies in the corporation. But this is where we need to focus on this, because these are the qualities that AI cannot replace. This is what makes us, in the long run, irreplaceable. These human elements. So when we talk about being here, the idea is being the ability for us to be present. AI is very data driven. AI looks at data analytics, can analyze data, which is something that's happened in the past, and then make projections, which is something about the future.
Yeah.
But AI cannot react and be in the present moment, which means that the ability for us to experience what is happening in front of us right now, to be present, to take a pulse of the room and not react, but rather than respond. It is the ability to be in the here and now is a very, very human quality. And perhaps maybe I would say many, many years in the future, we will have robots who can be present. But at this point in time, I don't see that. And hence, it still remains a very, very unique quality to be human and to experience the present moment, which is something that in corporate as a leader, and you walk into a room and you're making a big transaction, or there's a big offer on the table where there's stakes are high. It is your presence as a leader that is going to determine the outcome here, right? You can run all the analytics, you can run all the projections, but you as a leader need to focus on the presence and that you're bringing to that room. And I'm not saying don't use AI. I'm saying use AI for everything it's good at, but you be good at what only humans can do. And that is, as a leader, be present for your people, be present for those interactions and those high stake discussions.
I think what this makes me think about is the whole area around storytelling. I guess, what you're saying is AI is more often than not data driven. They can collect the data, they can collect what is being said. And I think at the end of the day, it's how we make sense of it. The sense making comes from us connecting with it and then communicating that with others. And that for me is a human factor rather than, it's not just about the content, it's about the storytelling in between what's being said and the content. Does that make sense?
I totally agree with you, Nita. And so the AI can give us the analytics, But when you and I are speaking face to face, I am curating everything based on nuances of our interaction. Because unless I'm present and unless I'm able to read your mood and your presence, I will not be able to respond in real time. And that is a skill, that is a human skill. To be here and present, to be able to read those cues, to be able to read the room, and then translate that information or transmit that message in a way that is impactful for the other person. And particularly when we're making a deal, it is that the leadership needs to have that presence to really communicate those ideas effectively, regardless if you use AI or not to do the analytics.
Something you were saying earlier on, that your 5 elements, your intention is to take it into the corporate environment. I'm wondering whether you've had an opportunity to test it, whether the corporate environment is ready for the human edge in the age of AI. What's been the response if you have spoken to them about this?
So I recently did a keynote through this collaborative. It's called Pennovation. It's through UPenn in Pennsylvania here. And so we had a lot of people from corporate and whatnot. And the interest in this is remarkable because people are noticing that they're implementing all these AI agents, but the staff is feeling disempowered. We're empowering technology, but the staff feels disempowered. They feel that they will be replaced. So there is this phobia, there is this disempowerment. And my argument to all these corporate leaders is that as you empower the technology in your workspace, you need to empower the humans, the humanity even more. And so this is the program that I curate, is that how do we empower that the human elements, right? Because if you do that, actually now that technology will make everything efficient, we have the time now to do things that we couldn't do before. We could spend time, the leadership can spend time developing presence, which we couldn't do before because we were doing all this busy work. The leadership could spend time developing the other 4 elements that I talk about: being undistracted, developing that deep focus, developing meaning, and developing alignment. So if we empower both, we can use the extra time from the efficiency that AI gives us to empower our humanity on this side. And the interest has been phenomenal. Let's put it that way.
I can see that if some of the workload gets taken off your hand, it creates a vacuum, doesn't it? Where you can fill it with things which are more meaningful and more important. I know from working within leadership, and there are lots of courses on presence, by the way, so how to have presence, how to have impact, and so forth. So maybe this is an opportunity to turn things a little bit around and saying, well, let's look at things. We can palm off certain things and pay more attention to the human element of it. Because I know, working in the corporate world for the last 30, 40 years, people often say, I don't think they mean it quite, human beings are our most important assets. And I know it doesn't always happen because the bottom line is probably more important. So this could be an important element for what you're touching on. I think for me is about expanding our own emotional intelligence, because connection, mental well-being, never forgotten alignment are all about the emotional intelligence that sometimes leaders don't always demonstrate because they're so busy doing the strategy or the analytics or the stakeholder management, whatever. What's your thoughts on that?
And you're right, Anita, is that, and it's not just emotional intelligence, it's also using our mental faculties and upgrading ourselves to a level where we can actually go beyond what the corporate culture was before. Let's say, as one of the things that my argument is, as people start implementing agentic systems in corporate, right? And it's great, it's going to improve your efficiency. But like I said, that extra efficiency, now that extra time we can devote to developing our human capital. But when we start developing our human capital, the benefit of that is, I'll give you for the second element that I talk about, and I'll just give you an example. One of the things that drives growth for corporate is the level of innovation that we can bring to the table, right?
Yes.
Where, the corporate is always asking that, what can we do differently? What can we do better, right? But to answer that question, what can we do differently and what can we do better, requires somebody to have that level of focus that they can innovate. And when we look at it from my perspective as a neuroscientist and a neuro-radiologist, when you look at our brain, right, first of all, it takes about 23 minutes for us to drop into the space of deep work, which means that we need to do a particular task for about 23 minutes before we enter that space of deep work. And if you're not familiar with that term, there's a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, right? And he talks about how we learn, right? And what we found is that people right now are receiving through emails and Slack and text messages about 96 to 120 interruptions every day, right? And during their workday. So think about it. If it takes 23 minutes to get into the space of deep work and you're getting 120 messages, nobody is entering the space of deep work. It's just not possible, right? So, and what we know is that if you enter that space of deep work and you stay there, and this is where the science of the 10,000 hour rule and the structured practice comes in, is that when you enter that deep space of deep work and you stay there, then you slowly start developing what we call as mastery, okay? And mastery is that you enter that space of deep work, whether, let's say in my case, my field is neuroscience and learning about the structure of the brain and seeing the nuances and everything like that, right? So if I keep going into that deep workspace, I start developing mastery in that area, which I believe probably over the past 20 years, I've crossed that 10,000 hour rule multiple times, okay? Why I'm saying all this is that only when you have mastery does it evolve into innovation. Only masters can innovate because I need to know this space well enough to bring a fresh idea because I know it well enough that now I can innovate within that. And so problem right now in terms of innovation is that we're asking people to innovate without giving them a mechanism to become a master. And so one of the things that the workshops and the program that I have as we're building out this corporate program is we're setting up mechanisms where we take people and we say that what is the area that they need to master? And now let's free up the time. Let's use that extra time and give them that space. In Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, he says that you need to curate 90-minute blocks for people. Why? Because the first 23 minutes, as I said, or almost the first half an hour, it just takes you that much time to get into that deep workspace. So in 90 minutes, the first 23 minutes is just getting into it. Now that you're in there, now you'll spend an hour really mastering this content. And when you repeat this process, when you have people mastering an area, these are the guys who are going to innovate in your workspace.
What comes up for me is this mastery and the 23 minutes and doing that deep work. It could be hard given the fact we're distracted a lot by social media and people stay on the surface as opposed to go in deep. Is that right? Do you think that's correct?
That is the challenge. That is the challenge. And that is why I'm saying that we need to curate these 90-minute blocks, because even in our education system, we are not teaching deep work and mastery. We're not teaching how many students know how to get into that deep workspace, that state of flow, where now they're really mastering that material. Because when a student actually experiences that, they will really start enjoying that material. But right now, everything is very much on the surface. But you look at people who have really innovated. If you look back at history and look at where some of the most life-changing and the innovations that changed the world, it came only because that person entered that space of mastery over and over again, and then was able to innovate within that space, So to answer your question, Nita, it is hard. It is hard. In the present day and age, with all the social media interactions, with all the notifications from work and everything like that, it is extremely hard. Nobody's entering that space. But that's where this corporate program that I'm talking about is that we're creating quiet areas where people are unbothered and are offline for 90 minutes and can actually work on something meaningful that in the long run will transform your company.
I'm kind of wondering, from what you're saying, who would be our past role models who might have done that? I suppose I tell you who popped into my mind when you were talking was that Steve Jobs. Maybe that's where he went. Maybe he went, I don't know. I have no idea, but perhaps, well, he went pretty deep into what he was doing, in my experience, to be so innovative because he changed technology for us. Well, at least that's what I think.
It's funny, Nita, I was thinking of the same person to give you an example, but if you read his autobiography and he talks about this, because when you want to think out of the box, first you need to know the box to think out of the box. And that's my premise, is that learn the box first well enough so that now you can think outside of it. And that's what he did really well. He learned the box. And then he said that, well, what is something that's really life-changing, or really what is the paradigm shift I can bring to this space? Okay. And that's what he was good at. But I would say the companies who are going to innovate in the next upcoming years are going to be companies that have these masters in their organization. Otherwise, you will not be able to innovate. You cannot rely on AI to give you the answers, because AI is always going to work on past data. It's going to be working off of ideas that have already been done. So most people will say, oh, I'll just ask Claude for a new idea and innovation, but it's working off of old data. So this is stuff that's already happened. I want you to innovate in your realm, in your capacity, and think out of the box, something fresh that nobody's heard of.
So as we wrap this up, what would be a final message would you like to give to our listeners around the human edge in the age of AI?
Nita, my message is very simple. I'm all for engaging with technology. and I use AI every day. But as we empower technology, we need to empower humanity even more. And it has to happen in parallel. Every company that is implementing agentic AI needs to implement a human empowerment system at the same time. Because what's the point of developing all this efficiency if you cannot take that efficiency to become more? What I'm saying is do everything you need to do with agentic AI. Develop that efficiency, go for it. But take that efficiency to develop your people, empower them to become what I call the masters in your company, because now this is the opportunity. There's never been an opportunity like this where you can gain back that efficiency and empower people to become more. So that is my message, is let's use technology to be more, not less.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful message, that working in conjunction with technology as opposed to being less and then technology being more. I think that for me, I've learned quite a lot around that. And I love the 5 framework elements that you spoke about. I think they're very powerful in how corporates can begin to look at leadership, the role of leadership, from a different perspective. So thank you. I've learned a lot from our conversation today. I really appreciate you coming on there today.
Pleasure, Nita.
If you're interested in working with me, connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or www.nitasharma.com. And if you enjoyed the podcast, why not consider subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you have access to your podcast, and leave a review.